This is a Federal News Network podcast.
Few people in government have more experience in federal labor relations and employee issues than my next guest. For the past year, she's been chairman of the Federal Labor Relations Authority. She's also someone I've known and interviewed several times over the years. For an update on FLRA and a few other things, Susan Sway-Grundman joins me now. Susan, good to have you back.
Tom, great to be with you again.
And the FLRA, now you've been there about a year, and just because I know some of the other jobs you've had earlier, is chairman of the FLRA kind of a divided job? That is, do you have administrative duties for the operations of the apparatus supporting the board, or do you get to spend all your time on cases?
You're absolutely right. My workload essentially doubled from being a member to the chairman. You know, it's all hands on deck. Everybody plays. We've got a great staff, very supportive, very intelligent, and a lot of institutional memory. So it's a good place to be at a good time.
But it's not a good place in terms of the budget allocation from Congress, which is starting to cause some problems.
You nailed it. So here's where we are. The proposed funding levels for 2024 range from $28 million to $29.4 million. So using the high mark, 29.4, that's still $200,000 lower than we were 2 decades ago. Now, factor in inflation since 2004, and you can pick your inflation rate. But the bottom line is, while our funding once sustained 213 employees on staff, today that number only supports 112. That's almost half of our staffing levels for the last 20 years. And yet, the mission itself has not changed. If anything, the work has expanded with rising unionization in the federal sector, a sharp spike in filings in our Office of General Counsel, up almost 60% in the last 2 years, and increasing demands for more tools and assistance to facilitate resolution of labor disputes. We are busier than ever, and yet we're at a 20-year low in funding.
That's kind of surprising because there's a lot of members of Congress, and certainly the current administration has been full-throated in their support for unionizing, whether the federal or the private sector workforce.
You're right. But, you know, compare us to other agencies, and not just any agency, but specifically those that address workers' protections in both the private and public sectors. The MSPB, the OSC, FMCS, NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, the National Mediation Board, they've all seen an increase over the last 20 years, ranging from a 20% bump to over a 100% bump. The FLRA is the only agency in the negative column. And note that our sister agency, the NLRB, was flat funded for 10 years, but we've been so for double that time. And you and I, we all understand that we live in times of fiscal austerity and that flat funding is a reality. But with inflation and an anticipated cost of living increase, there's just no more meat left on the bone.
And what effect has this had, do you think, so far?
Well, if nothing changes in the proposed funding that we're seeing, like many agencies, 80% of our funding in any given year goes directly to support our people, our staff, salaries and benefits. The remaining 20% indirectly supports our staff, infrastructure, IT, rent. Worst case scenario, what we once thought was a mere possibility may now be the eventuality. We're talking furloughs, beginning as early as next year. Furloughs is the same people who process the cases, investigate the charges, mediate, litigate these matters, and issue decisions. They will be sent home for periods of time. And that directly impacts when and how long disputes will linger government-wide. It will have a ripple effect, not just on our agency, but on every agency and its unions that bring their concerns before us. Now, we've had a little experience in this area, so if you don't mind, I'd like to share it. They say that justice delayed is justice denied. With over 4 years without a general counsel, we had a number of ULPs. So as a result, when an acting GC, Charlotte A. Dye, was appointed in 2021, she had almost 500 cases waiting for her on day one of her job. In some of those cases, the parties and potential witnesses had moved on. And in one particular case, a party died. And while Ms. Dye and our amazing regional offices were able to clear the backlog with cases now scheduled well into next year, keep in mind they're still dealing with cases coming in with almost 60% increase. So, as she has said before, it's like trying to tread water while you are drowning.
We're speaking with Susan Sway Grundmann, chairman of the Federal Labor Relations Authority. And just to clarify something you said earlier, is it in fact down to 112 employees from 213?
Yeah, correct, yes.
Okay. And maybe just help us understand the nature of the cases when you were at the Merit Systems Protection Board and later at the Office of Congressional Workplace Rights. Those were individuals that had a grievance with another individual or maybe with the hierarchy of their agency. In the case of the FLRA, is it always a bargaining unit versus the government, or do individuals have issues there also?
That's a great question. You're right in that we see individual cases at OCWR and at MSPB. Here, generally, it's unions and agencies. Occasionally, we will see an individual, but we are here to adjudicate the issues between agencies and unions and their bargaining disputes or their lack of bargaining disputes. It's a different dynamic. Also, in comparing MSPB, there are a number of statutes that generally come into play. At the FLRA, basically, it's one, and that's the Federal Service Labor Management Relations Statute.
So it's a little simpler maybe in some sense.
It's not any simpler. It's just as complex, but all the disputes generally focus on that one statute.
And how has the workload been? I know during the Trump administration there were some major issues that I think it was the VA and the American Federation of Government Employees, and there was a big dispute that went on for some time over like 15 or 16 of the clauses in a big agreement. But that all got resolved, and I guess there's a new makeup to the board, of course, because that changes when the administration changes. So with all the moonlight and roses expressed by the administration between itself and the big unions, shouldn't the workload be going down now?
The workload is always high. Disputes are always there. As much as parties try and resolve their own issues, that's where we exist. And let me take a moment just to kind of dispel a myth that might be out there. Some people may perceive us to be at the end of the process, that we don't enter the picture until the parties cannot reach an agreement. But in reality, we are there throughout the process. We're there in the beginning to educate the parties on their rights and protections under the law. You will see videos on our website. We're on YouTube. We just released a 5-part series on collective bargaining in the federal sector, our version of streaming, and it's received record numbers of hits. We're also there in the middle. We offer mediation services, facilitation services through all 3 of our components, the Office of General Counsel, the Federal Services Impasses Panel, and the Authority. And the resolution rate for most of these cases is extremely high. And then finally, of course, we're at the end of the process with the issuance of the decision. But one of the things we want to do is to give the parties tools to not only resolve their current dispute, but to resolve disputes in the future.
And how do you ensure that the two sides, let's say management and the unions, perceive the FLRA as impartial, as a referee, and someone whose judgments are according to what the statutes say, as opposed to pro-labor or anti-labor?
I think the parties who come to us understand what our role is, that it is an independent, quasi-judicial, neutral. And that comes through not only through our adjudication process, but through mediation as well. We don't take a side.
And getting back to the budget issue, you have been to Capitol Hill to talk about this. What do they say? What's their answer when you show them these numbers that the buying power is 50% of what it was 2 decades ago?
We understand these are times of fiscal austerity, and the other agencies also understand it as well. But we're the only agency that is funded not only at a lower level, below the rate of inflation, but lower than the actual dollar amount funded at 20 years ago. So come on, Tom, let's do the math. What if you were paid at a rate less than you received 2 decades ago? What would you do?
I would leave, but, you can't. The FLRA needs to exist because it's statutory. So that's why I'm just curious as to what the members say when confronted with this information.
Exactly. And I think the message that we've borne is that this just isn't a union issue. It's not a management issue. It's a good government issue. When the parties are deprived of